The silence before her footsteps. The hospital corridor was quiet, almost too quiet. Soft beeps echoed from distant rooms, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. A nurse walked past slowly, glancing into room 304 where Keanu Reeves lay still, a thin line of light cutting across his face from the half-closed blinds. He had been there for days now, unmoving, his body healing, but his mind lost in a fog that felt endless. No reporters knew he was there. No cameras, no noise, no flash. The world outside went on talking about his next movie, about his mysterious kindness, about how he always stayed humble despite fame. But inside this room, none of that mattered. His eyes were closed, and the quiet hum of the heart monitor was the only rhythm that kept him connected to life. A soft knock broke the silence. The nurse looked up. The door opened slowly, and Sandra Bullock stepped inside. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that came from lack of sleep, but the kind that came from memories. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, looking at him. The man who had once made her laugh so hard that tears rolled down her cheeks. The man who had shared silence with her more comfortably than anyone else ever could. She walked closer, her heels making no sound on the floor. She had rehearsed what to say 100 times in her head on the drive here. But now, standing there, words refused to come out. She simply stared at him. His pale face, the faint bruise near his temple, the tubes running into his arm. And for the first time in a long while, Sandra felt afraid. Afraid that the man who had once carried pain with such grace might finally be giving up. The nurse whispered, "He hasn't spoken in 2 days, but he's stable." Sandra nodded silently, her eyes not leaving Keanu. When the nurse left, she finally sat down beside his bed, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. "You promised me, remember?" she said softly. "You promised me you wouldn't let life break you again." Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked at his still face, remembering a day years ago when he had said something she could never forget. Pain doesn't destroy you. It reveals who you are. And now, seeing him like this, she wondered if those words still lived inside him, somewhere deep beneath the silence. Outside, the sky began to darken. Rain tapped gently against the window. Sandra stayed there, holding his hand, whispering small things, stories from the past, jokes they used to laugh about. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she hoped he did. Sometimes hope was all you had. Suddenly, a faint movement. His fingers twitched. Her heart skipped a beat. She leaned forward quickly, her eyes wide. "Keanu?" she whispered. No response. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe not. She pressed her hand against his gently. "It's me," she said, her voice shaking. "Sandra." "I'm right here." A faint sound escaped his lips, too soft to be a word. She felt tears fill her eyes. She had seen him strong, calm, unshaken. But this, seeing him fragile, was something that tore at her heart. She wanted to tell him everything she had held back all these years. About the day he disappeared quietly after the funeral. About the loneliness she felt knowing someone so kind carried so much sorrow alone. The monitor beeped softly again. A nurse entered, adjusted the drip, smiled faintly, and left. Sandra wiped her eyes quickly and forced a small smile. "You know," she said, trying to sound light, "you still owe me a coffee. You can't get out of it by just lying here." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, she thought she saw a tiny movement at the corner of his mouth. A shadow of a smile, barely there. It was enough to make her heart ache and heal at the same time. But what she didn't know was that behind those closed eyes, Keanu heard her. Not clearly, not fully, but something in her voice reached him. In the quiet corners of his mind, he saw flashes, laughter, a film set, a bus racing through city streets, the way she had looked at him once, years ago. When everything was simpler, he wanted to speak, to open his eyes, to tell her he was still there. But something held him back. A pain deeper than physical, a memory he wasn't ready to face. As night fell, Sandra stayed. Nurses offered to bring her a blanket, but she refused. She just sat there, whispering softly, telling him about the world outside, about small things, the way the city lights looked that evening, how fans still asked about them together, how people never forgot their friendship, and in the silence between her words, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would not leave until he woke up. Not this time. As the clock ticked past midnight, the storm outside grew louder. Thunder rolled softly in the distance, and somewhere between the rain and the hum of machines, Sandra felt something change, not in him, but in herself. She realized how much she still cared, how much his pain had always mattered to her, and how, maybe, fate had brought her back here for a reason she was yet to understand. The moment he opened his eyes, the first light of morning slipped into the hospital room like a quiet visitor. The rain had stopped, leaving small drops shining on the window glass. Sandra was still there, sitting in the same chair, her head resting on her folded arms beside the bed. She had not slept much. Every few minutes she would open her eyes to check on Keanu, afraid that if she looked away too long, he might drift further from her. The machines hummed softly, steady, calm. She listened to that rhythm like it was a heartbeat of hope. She whispered to herself, "Just wake up, please. That's all I want." As the sun rose higher, a soft movement stirred beneath her fingers. She blinked, unsure if it was her imagination again. But then slowly his hand tightened around hers. Her heart jumped. She lifted her head instantly and saw his eyelids move. "Keanu!" Her voice was shaky. She leaned closer, afraid to breathe too loudly. His eyes fluttered open. Not fully, just enough to let in a thin sliver of light. They moved weakly toward her. For a second, confusion filled them. Like he was waking in a world that didn't make sense anymore. Sandra's face blurred in his vision, but her voice reached him clearly. "You're okay," she said softly, holding his hand tighter. "You're safe now." His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. He blinked again, trying to understand where he was, why his body ached, and why Sandra, of all people, was there beside him after all these years. She smiled through tears. "You scared everyone, you know that?" His gaze drifted to the ceiling. Then slowly, with great effort, he turned back to her. "How long?" The words were dry, cracked, like his voice hadn't been used for days. "3 days," she whispered, but it felt like forever. He closed his eyes again, a faint sigh escaping. Silence stretched between them, not the awkward kind, but a heavy one, filled with unspoken memories. After a moment, Sandra said quietly, "Do you remember what happened?" He didn't answer at first. Flashes of the accident rushed through his mind, the screech of tires, the sudden blur of headlights, the impact that sent him spiraling into darkness. But beyond that, there was something else, something heavier. A meeting he had missed that day, a call he never returned, and a regret that had been haunting him for months. He looked at her again. "Why are you here?" She hesitated. "Because you needed someone to be." His eyes softened, but he said nothing. For a while she talked, about how she had heard from one of his assistants, how she dropped everything and came straight here. She told him that the world didn't know, that she wanted to keep it that way at least until he was strong enough. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. She could tell he was still half between pain and awareness, his body healing but his mind heavy with thoughts he wasn't ready to share. Then she said something that made him finally meet her eyes again. "I know what you've been doing, Keanu. All those quiet donations, the hospital funds, the orphanage visits. You think no one notices, but some of us still do?" He blinked, surprised. "You shouldn't have—" "Don't say that," she interrupted softly. "You spend your life helping others, but when it's you, you shut everyone out. Why?" He turned his head slightly toward the window, watching the sunlight spill through the blinds. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Because kindness isn't a debt. I don't do it for thanks," she nodded. "I know. But sometimes even the kindest man needs someone to remind him he's human too." That made him quiet again. His eyes glistened faintly, not from pain, but from the weight of her words. He had carried loneliness for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen, really seen, without the mask of calm he always wore for the world. After a while, Sandra stood and adjusted his blanket. Rest now, she said. I'll be right here when you wake up again. He looked at her, his lips parting slightly. You don't have to stay, she smiled sadly. I know. That's why I will. For the first time in days, his eyes closed peacefully, not in exhaustion, but in quiet trust. Sandra sat back down, her gaze soft, her thoughts deep. But as she reached for her phone to check messages, she noticed something strange. A small folded note lying on the side table near his bed. She frowned. It wasn't there the night before. The nurse hadn't mentioned it. She picked it up slowly, her hands trembling a little. The handwriting was uneven, tired. It was Keanu's. She unfolded it and read silently. If I don't wake up, tell her I'm sorry I never said what I should have years ago. Tell her I still remember the day she waited in the rain and I drove away. Her eyes widened. Her throat tightened. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She looked at him again, sleeping now, his breathing steady. The note shook in her hands. She whispered, Oh, Keanu, you still remember. In that quiet room, surrounded by machines and sunlight, Sandra realized something. This wasn't just about an accident. It was about unfinished words, about a moment from years ago that still lived between them. And now, with fate bringing her here, maybe it was finally time to face it. She folded the note carefully and slipped it back where she found it. Then she leaned closer and whispered gently near his ear. When you're ready, we'll talk about that day. I didn't forget either. Outside, the sky grew brighter. The world continued moving, unaware that inside one quiet room, two hearts that had once drifted apart had begun to find their way back. And as the morning light touched his face, Keanu stirred slightly as if her words had reached the last corner of his dreams. The memory in the rain, the next few days, passed slowly. Like time itself was afraid to move too fast. Keanu's strength began to return little by little. He could now sit up, speak softly, and even manage small smiles when Sandra teased him about hospital food. Yet behind his calm face, something unspoken still lingered, a shadow of guilt that refused to fade. Every morning, Sandra arrived early. She brought him coffee that he never finished, magazines he never read, and stories that made him laugh just enough to forget the pain. To the nurses, they looked like two old friends reunited by fate. But to Sandra, it felt deeper, like they were walking through a quiet storm that neither of them fully understood. One afternoon, when the sunlight fell across the bed in soft golden lines, she decided it was time. Keanu, she said quietly, her hands folded in her lap. That note I found. You remember what you wrote? He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. I do. You mentioned the rain, she continued gently. That day. What really happened? For a while he said nothing. His gaze drifted toward the window again, as if he could still see the rain falling outside that memory. Finally he spoke, his voice low and slow, every word carrying the weight of something long buried. It was the last day of filming, he said. We had wrapped up late. Everyone was laughing, celebrating. But you waited near the gate under the rain, holding that little blue umbrella. She smiled faintly. I remember. You told me you'd come back. He closed his eyes for a second. I wanted to. I really did. But I got a call that night. It was bad news. Someone close to me. I panicked. I didn't know what to say to you, so I just drove away. She listened quietly, her heart heavy. She had spent years trying to understand that night, standing there in the rain, waiting, thinking he'd forgotten. But now hearing the truth, the old hurt softened into something else. You could have told me, she whispered. I was ashamed, he said simply. You were the only person who ever looked at me and saw something good. I didn't want you to see me broken again. Tears welled in her eyes, but she smiled through them. You think kindness means being unbreakable. It doesn't. It means being real. He looked at her. And for the first time since waking up, his eyes truly met hers. Steady, raw, honest. I missed you, he said quietly. The words came out so softly that she almost thought she imagined them. But the tremor in his voice told her he meant every syllable. Then why didn't you call? she asked, half smiling, half crying. He sighed. Because you moved on. You had your own world, your own peace, and I didn't want to disturb that. She leaned back, shaking her head gently. You never disturbed my peace, Keanu. You were part of it. For a long time, silence filled the room again. But this time it was warm. Not heavy, not sad. It felt like a bridge slowly being rebuilt. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Sandra stood to leave. I'll come tomorrow, she said softly. He nodded, watching her walk toward the door. But just before she stepped out, he said, Sandra? She turned back. Thank you. For not walking away that night, even if I did. She smiled, eyes glistening. Some people are worth waiting for, even in the rain. After she left, Keanu sat quietly, staring at the folded note on the table. He picked it up, unfolded it once more, and whispered to himself, I thought this was goodbye. Maybe it's a beginning instead. But just as he placed the note back down, something strange caught his eye. Another envelope, smaller, tucked beneath the pillow. It wasn't his handwriting. His brows furrowed as he reached for it. On the front, in soft, elegant letters, it said only one thing. For Keanu. When you're ready. His heart skipped. The handwriting was familiar. It was from her, from Sandra. He opened it slowly. Inside was a single line written in blue ink. You once told me pain reveals who we are. Maybe now it's time to let it heal who we were. His eyes stayed on the words for a long while, his chest rising and falling with quiet emotion. Then, for the first time since the accident, he felt something deeper than pain. Peace. He folded the note carefully, placed it near his heart, and looked out the window where the sky had begun to turn golden again. He whispered, Maybe it's time. The visitor at the door, it was late afternoon when Keanu was finally discharged from the hospital. The air outside smelled fresh, washed clean by the rain from the night before. He stood for a moment under the pale sunlight, breathing it in, feeling the cool wind brush against his face. Beside him, Sandra walked quietly, carrying a small bag of his belongings. You sure you're okay to walk? She asked softly. He smiled faintly. I've been through worse. She gave him a look that was half stern, half amused. That's what you always say right before something dramatic happens again. He chuckled, the first genuine laugh since his accident. You make it sound like my life is a movie. Maybe it is, she said gently. Except this time there's no director to yell cut when it gets painful. He nodded, his eyes turning thoughtful. Maybe that's the point. They walked slowly to her car. The city around them was calm. People crossing streets, birds resting on the wires, a few fans passing by without realizing who he was. For once, it felt nice to just be human, not a star, not a name, just a man trying to start again. Inside the car, Sandra drove in silence for a while. She turned the radio off and let the sound of the road fill the space between them. Keanu leaned back, looking out at the clouds drifting lazily across the sky. After some time, she asked, Do you want to go home? He hesitated. Not yet. She looked at him briefly. Then where? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one knows us. She smiled softly. I think I know a place. They drove for nearly an hour until the city faded into open roads lined with tall trees. Finally, they reached a small lakeside cabin, one that Sandra had bought years ago for peace and solitude. It was simple, surrounded by pine and silence. As she opened the door, he paused, taking in the sight, the small wooden table, the shelf of old books, the faint smell of rain-soaked earth. You still come here? He asked. Whenever I need to remember who I am, she replied. He nodded quietly. It feels like a good place to remember. They spent the evening talking, not about work, not about fame, but about everything else they had buried over the years. She told him about how life had changed, about friends they'd lost, about the loneliness that sometimes crept in despite all the success. He listened, and for once, he didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. As night settled, Sandra lit a small fire in the old stone fireplace. The glow painted their faces in soft gold. Keanu sat across from her, hands resting on his knees. You know, she said, when I first heard about your accident, I didn't think. I just drove. I didn't even tell anyone. He looked up slowly. Why? She took a breath. Because when someone you care about is in pain, you don't wait for reasons. You just go. He stared into the flames for a long time. Then he said quietly, I'm glad you did. The warmth between them was quiet. Not romantic, not rushed, just real, built from the pieces of years gone by. But as they sat there, a sudden knock echoed through the cabin. It was soft but firm, unexpected. Both of them looked toward the door. Were you expecting someone? Keanu asked. Sandra shook her head slowly. No. No one knows we're here. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it cautiously. Standing outside was a woman drenched slightly from the mist. Her hair was tied back, and in her hands was a small envelope. Miss Bullock? The woman asked. Sandra nodded, uncertain. Yes. This is for Mr. Reeves, the woman said, handing her the envelope. He asked me to deliver it weeks ago before the accident. I was told to wait until he was awake. Keanu's eyes widened slightly. From who? The woman looked confused. You sent it yourself, sir. But it came back to our office unopened. I thought maybe there was some mistake. She handed the letter to him and left before they could ask more. The door closed softly behind her. Keanu stared at the envelope in his hand. His name was written on it, but in his own handwriting, slightly shaky, like it had been written in a hurry. Sandra frowned. Did you write that? He shook his head slowly. I don't remember. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. The message was brief but chillingly clear. If you're reading this, it means the truth finally found you. Don't go back to the old place. It's not safe anymore. His eyes darkened. Sandra stepped closer. What does that mean? He folded the paper, his mind racing. It means someone knew about the accident. Maybe even before it happened. Her face paled. Keanu, are you saying... I don't know, he said quietly, looking toward the window where the night fog had begun to roll over the lake. But maybe this wasn't an accident after all. The fire crackled softly, the room suddenly colder. Sandra moved closer, her voice trembling. Then we find out who did this. Together. He looked at her, tired, scarred, but no longer broken. And for the first time, there was determination in his eyes. Together, he repeated, the words steady like a vow. Outside, the lake shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a faint engine sound echoed, as if someone else was still watching. The truth in the shadows, the next morning arrived quietly, but neither Keanu nor Sandra had slept. The letter from the night before lay on the wooden table between them, its edges slightly curled from the fire's warmth. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The silence in the cabin felt heavy, almost alive, as if the air itself was waiting for something to be said. Keanu sat by the window, staring at the lake. The fog still hovered over the surface like a soft ghost. He ran a hand through his hair, his expression unreadable. Sandra, sitting across from him, kept glancing at the letter, her mind turning over the words again and again. Don't go back to the old place. It's not safe anymore. Finally, she broke the silence. Keanu, what's the old place? He looked at her slowly, his eyes distant. A house. The one where I used to stay between shoots. I bought it years ago out near the hills. Quiet. Private. No one knew about it except a few close people. And you think someone's trying to keep you away from it? He nodded slowly. It sounds insane, but yes. Before the accident, I was there. I remember hearing something outside, footsteps, maybe a car door, then nothing. After that, the crash. She leaned forward. You think someone followed you? He didn't answer. Instead, he took the letter and looked at the handwriting again. That's definitely mine, he said softly, but I have no memory of writing it. Maybe it's something I wrote and forgot, or maybe someone wanted you to believe you wrote it, Sandra finished quietly. The idea hung in the air, sharp and uneasy. Keanu exhaled deeply, his gaze fixed on the floor. For years, I thought I could live quietly, do my work, stay away from drama. But lately, strange things kept happening. Emails I didn't send, messages I don't remember writing. I ignored them, thinking it was just stress. Now I'm not so sure. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. Why didn't you tell anyone? He gave a sad smile. You know me. I don't like worrying people. She shook her head. You don't like being helped, that's what it is. Maybe, he admitted softly. After a moment, she stood. We need to go there. To that house. Find out what's happening. It might be dangerous, he warned. So is not knowing, she said firmly. And you won't go alone. He met her eyes, determined, steady, caring. It reminded him of why he trusted her more than anyone. Okay, he said finally. We'll go. They reached the house by evening. It stood at the edge of a forest road, quiet and half-hidden behind tall trees. The paint was slightly worn, the garden overgrown. Keanu stepped out of the car slowly, every step stirring old memories. This place feels different, Sandra whispered. It's been a while, he said, unlocking the door. Inside, the house smelled of dust and time. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, catching tiny particles in the air. Everything looked untouched. The books on the shelf, the pictures on the wall, the coffee mug still sitting on the counter. When was the last time you were here? She asked. 3 weeks ago, he said. Before the accident. She looked around carefully, scanning every corner. You said you heard something that night. He nodded, moving toward the hallway. Yeah. From the back room. They walked slowly down the corridor. The floor creaked softly beneath their feet. When they reached the door at the end, Keanu paused. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the knob. Inside was a small office, papers scattered across the desk, a computer still plugged in but switched off, and a few photographs pinned to the wall. Sandra walked over and picked one up. It was a picture of Keanu from years ago, taken on a film set. Beside it was another photo, this time of both of them laughing during an interview. She frowned. Who put these here? I didn't, he said. At least I don't think I did. Just then, the computer flickered to life on its own. The screen glowed faintly, displaying a folder titled Truth Files. Sandra's heart raced. Did you? No, Keanu said quickly, stepping closer. He clicked the folder. Inside were dozens of text documents, each with strange names. Letters word 1, letters 2, letters final. He opened one. Inside was a message written in his own style, his own tone. But he had never seen it before. They said the truth must stay hidden. But if you're reading this, they failed. Sandra gasped softly. Who wrote that? He stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. I don't know. But whoever it was, they knew everything about me. Before he could scroll further, the screen suddenly went black. A faint beeping sound came from the computer tower. Then, smoke! Keanu, step back! Sandra cried, pulling him away. The machine hissed for a moment before dying completely. They stood in silence, staring at the blackened screen. The room smelled faintly of burnt plastic. Someone didn't want us to read that, she said quietly. He nodded slowly. No, someone wanted to erase it, and maybe erase me too. She touched his arm gently. Then we find out who, no matter what it takes. He looked at her, the weight of fear and trust both visible in his eyes. You sure you want to be part of this? I already am, she said firmly. You don't have to face this alone. As they left the room, the faintest reflection moved across the window, a dark figure outside watching from the trees. Neither of them saw it. They locked the door and walked back to the car, unaware that the danger had followed them there. And as the night deepened, Keanu glanced once more at the letter in his pocket. The words replayed in his mind again and again. It's not safe anymore. For the first time, he realized it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. The truth beneath the silence. The drive back to the cabin was long, quiet, and heavy with thought. The forest road stretched endlessly ahead, the only sound being the rhythmic hum of the tires and the faint rustle of leaves outside. Sandra kept her hand steady on the wheel, but her eyes kept glancing toward Keanu, who sat beside her, lost in thought. The letter still rested in his lap, folded and creased from being read too many times. Finally, she spoke. You've been quiet for hours. He looked out the window, his voice low. Because I'm starting to remember, she glanced at him. Remember what? the night before the accident," he said slowly. "There was someone in the house. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. I heard footsteps, saw a shadow outside. I tried to check, but when I opened the door, the headlights came straight at me. And then everything went black." Sandra's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "So it wasn't just an accident?" "No," he said softly. "Someone wanted to make sure I never woke up." The car went silent again. The road wound through tall trees, shadows falling across their faces like ghosts from the past. Sandra turned off onto a narrow dirt path leading back to the lake. The cabin appeared in view, standing quietly under the fading sky. As they stepped out of the car, Sandra felt it, a strange stillness, heavier than before. Something wasn't right. The front door, which she was sure they had locked, stood slightly open. She froze. "Keanu," she whispered. He saw it too. Without a word, he motioned for her to stay back and stepped slowly toward the door. The wood creaked softly beneath his feet. Inside, the room was dim. The fire from the night before, long dead. The air smelled faintly of smoke, but not from the fireplace. Something else. Something burning. He stepped closer to the table. The letter that had been lying there was gone. In its place, a new envelope. Same handwriting, same paper. He picked it up carefully. Sandra came closer, her heart pounding. "What does it say?" He opened it and read aloud. "You weren't supposed to survive. Stop looking. Some things are better left buried." Sandra's face went pale. "Who would send that?" "Someone who's afraid of what I know," he said, his tone dark. Before she could reply, a faint sound came from outside, gravel crunching under tires. They both turned toward the window. A black car had stopped near the edge of the trees. Its headlights cut through the darkness. The engine turned off, and silence followed. Keanu's jaw tightened. "Stay here." "No," Sandra said firmly, grabbing his arm. "We face this together." The door creaked as it opened. A tall man stepped out of the shadows, his face half hidden under a hood. Keanu's eyes narrowed. Something about his posture felt familiar. The man stopped a few steps away and spoke in a calm voice. "You were told to stop. Who are you?" Keanu asked. "Someone who tried to protect you," the man said. "But you made it harder by surviving." Sandra stepped forward. "Protect him? You almost killed him!" The man looked at her, his expression unreadable. That crash wasn't meant to kill him. It was meant to erase what he had found. "The files, the messages. He wasn't supposed to see them." Keanu's voice hardened. "What was I supposed to forget?" The man sighed. "Years ago, during a charity project, you uncovered something. Funds being stolen, people being hurt. You tried to report it quietly. They found out. I was sent to watch you, to keep you safe at first, then to make sure you didn't dig deeper." Sandra's eyes widened. "And when he did?" The man looked down. They wanted silence. "The crash was meant to warn you, not end you. But something went wrong." Keanu's hands clenched into fists. "You watched my life fall apart. You let me believe it was all my fault. It had to look real," the man said quietly. "If they thought you knew, you'd be gone by now." Sandra took a step closer, her voice steady despite the fear. "Then help us finish it. Tell the truth." The man hesitated. His eyes softened, regret flickering across his face. "It's too late for that. They're already watching." Before they could respond, he reached into his pocket and placed a small flash drive on the table. "Everything you need is here. It's the truth. But once you open it, you'll never be able to go back." Then he turned and walked toward the door. Keanu called out, "Why help us now?" The man stopped for a moment and said quietly, "Because someone once told me kindness shouldn't be punished. Maybe she was right." And then he was gone. Into the darkness. Into the sound of the forest wind. That night, Keanu and Sandra sat together by the fire, the flash drive resting on the table between them. Neither moved to pick it up. Sandra finally broke the silence. "What if it changes everything?" He looked at her gently. "Maybe it's time everything changed." She nodded slowly. "Then whatever happens next, we face it together." He smiled softly, the kind of smile that came from exhaustion and peace all at once. "Together," he repeated. They plugged the flash drive into the laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing dozens of files, photographs, and documents, proof of corruption, of lies, of people who had tried to silence him. It was all there. But what mattered most wasn't the danger anymore. It was the truth. The kind of truth that set something free. As the firelight reflected in their eyes, Sandra reached out and took his hand. "You always said pain reveals who we are," she whispered. "But maybe it also shows us who we can still be." He looked at her, and for the first time since the accident, he didn't look haunted. He looked alive. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the surface of the lake. Birds began to sing softly in the distance, and for a moment the world felt still, like all the noise had finally gone quiet. Keanu leaned back, exhaling deeply. "Maybe it's over," he said softly. Sandra smiled faintly. "No," she whispered. "It's just beginning."